Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Caio Pimentel. I'm here today to present the Café Pesquisa and on behalf of the research committee. Our guest today is Dr. Dany Lang. He's an associate professor at Universities of Sorbonne, Paris North. He works on topics such as unemployment, income distribution, agent-based models, and then you will give us a lecture on the political and economic situation in France, okay? The title of the presentation is The Economic Consequences of Mr. Macron, okay? And that's it. Welcome, Dany. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So thank you very much for this invitation. Thanks to Liliane. Thanks to Bruno de Conti, my friend who's not here. I'm pleased to see you all, and I would be happy to respond to your questions. So this is what Bruno ordered from me. So if you are not happy about the topic, you need to complain to Bruno de Conti, right? He ordered this for me because he knows I'm a member of a group of economists in France, of non-mainstream economists called les Économistes atterrés. This is our logo, and I will explain what it is to start with. And I've wrote that as a member of the Économistes atterrés, okay? But I'm also an academic, so we are trying to use academic tools and theories and this kind of things to criticize mainstream theories and mainstream policies. So I would explain, now we are close to the final end of Mr. Macron, almost 10 years of neoliberalism in our country. So I will try to explain his policy and try to see some other political economy aspects of his 2 mandates. So as you can understand, I'm quite critical of Mr. Macron. So, this is a quotation from Alfred Marshall. Now, Alfred Marshall was a neoclassical economist in Cambridge, but I think he's still a very interesting economist. He's been the PhD supervisor of Keynes. And when you read Marshall, it's always interesting to read the Marshall, not that you have in the main part of the book, but the footnotes. The footnotes of Marshall are very interesting and paving the way to Keynes. And this is a quotation of Marshall I like pretty much because, he said supply and demand. At the bottom of it, it means that supply and demand are the two blades of the same pair of scissors. So you cannot just cut any piece of paper without using these two blades. Okay, that's in his famous Principle of Economics, one of his main books. Well, to sum up Macron's policy, he relied on only one blade, and our theoretical foundation of that for sure, in the mainstream economics, new classical theory and so on, and we'll discuss that. But he relied on this simple blade that is supply side policy, while systematically neglecting aggregate demand, right? This is clear. This is the whole meaning of the Macron 10 years. You will tell me it's not new in many countries. Well, it's not new in France because we had the turn of the beginning of the 80s under the so-called socialist government in 83, when they completely changed from a Keynesian and Marxist perspective to a monetarist perspective. But it has never been so intense, so violent, and so dense. That's under Mr. Macron. Okay, so this presentation is going to try to discuss what we have had, and I will present the main policies. I will discuss many aspects. I will discuss the economic effect. I will sometimes use economic theory. If something is not clear, just raise your hand. Don't hesitate to interrupt. Okay, Just a few words about the group called les Économistes atterrés. It is a group that started in 2011. We didn't expect that to take such a dimension. I don't know whether we are famous in Brazil. I don't think so, but we are famous in many European countries. The manifesto that we published in 2011 has been translated in 90 or 100 languages, so it's available in Portuguese for sure. I translated it into English. It all started with a group of 6 persons. I was amongst them who had decided to do something about austerity in Greece. Because you know, at the turn of the 2010s, the Troika, which is the European Commission with the European Central Bank and the IMF, had decided to impose very harsh austerity policies on Greece. And we were thinking, come on, we were all different. So there was a Keynesian, regular Keynesians, there were post-Keynesians, there were Marxists around the table. We were 6 and we were thinking we have to do something about that. And initially we thought about writing a short paper in one of the French main journals about you should not go into that path of austerity. But then we had around the table 4 famous French economists, Philippe Askenazy, Thomas Coutreau, André Orléans and Henri Sterdignac. These people are good, they are different, and they all wrote huge parts, and it became a manifesto. It became a manifesto, and the manifesto circulated around. We wanted something like 40 economists signing it. In a few days, we had 630 economists from all around the world who signed this manifesto against austerity. And this manifesto clearly challenges the neoliberal orthodoxy and try to reopen alternatives to the so-called there is no alternative à la Margaret Thatcher, especially in the case of Greece. Okay? And we have in this manifesto is organized around false certainties, what we call false certainties, for example, market efficiency, austerity as a factor of growth, etc., etc., unemployment, fully voluntary, and so on. So this manifesto is organized around 10 false certainties, and we wrote a number of counter-proposals. I'm not one of the main authors. These people are the main authors. I've wrote 2 of the 22 proposals. So that's, with the English translation, that's my contribution to the manifesto at that time. So we went on. We didn't expect this kind of success. And at that time, I have to tell you that story. I'm not going to insist during hours, but still it was a nice story. An editor came to us. The editor is called Les Liens qui Libèrent. It was a small editing place, and they did believe that this manifesto could be sold in French and in other languages. And we thought the guy is crazy because it's free online, it's circulating everywhere. And at the end, we sold more than 100,000 copies of the manifesto just in France. More than 5,000 is a lot in economics in France, and we sold more than 100,000. We have 30,000 copies of the Spanish versions were sold, etc., etc. And by the way, in Spain, it started. It was used by the people fighting against austerity, the indignados that finally organized themselves at the end to become the left party in Spain. So that was their starting point, this manifesto. So since then, we have written many other We have written many other books, especially about the next European treaties. I coordinated this one, l'Europe maltraitée, with 4 other authors. Changer l'Europe, Changing Europe. Le Nouveau Manifeste, that I also coordinated a few years later. 4 years later, we wrote a new manifesto. And the last book was just after COVID, and it is called What Do We Really Need? And there are some thoughts about alternative paths, an alternative future to neoliberalism. So Les Liens qui Libèrent is our editor, and this is our website. Well, and what we also do is to do notes about the program of the candidates. And it's not always, it's not always easy. I did many of these notes with some colleagues and very active in this field. And in 2017, I wrote a note with Henri Stagnant on what France is going to become under Macron. Okay? And usually policy notes on the web, they get a number of 1,000 copies and so on. But at that time, we got 1 million people downloading this note, which is very huge at the French level. I know that here you have Laura Carvalho, so that's nothing as compared to what Laura does. But in France, it's huge. And we were very concerned about Macron coming to power because it was clear to us that Macron was the next Margaret Thatcher. And Macron admires Margaret Thatcher. And he did Thatcherite things to our country. So we wrote this note called Economics in Reverse Gear, but there is a play on words because the movement of Macron was called En Marche, walking. And we said En Marche Arrière, walking backwards. Okay? So there is a play on words that you cannot translate really in English. We wrote that note, very successful. Even the economists supporting Macron, who later became the head of the Council of Economic Advisors and so on, had to respond to us because the note was very popular. And at that time, Macron was trying to convince everybody that he was beyond the left and the right. You know, after all, he had been the Minister of Finance of a so-called socialist government during years, and he was trying to convince everybody that he was beyond the left and the right, and that he's gonna, try to do a kind of synthesis of the left of the right and take the best of both parts. Well, at the end of the day, so he was saying, I'm not right-wing, I'm not left-wing. At the end of the day, he has not been left-wing, he has not been left-wing at all. Okay. It's been a very right-wing policy and very neoconservative one. Okay, what we predicted in these notes is that under Macron we would have stagnant wages and growing inequality, that there won't be any productivity gains, that there are going to be lots of social tensions and disorders, that the public debt is not going to be reduced. We are not obsessed by that, but he was so obsessed by that, he was saying, after my mandate, the public debt will disappear, etc., etc. We predicted that he would neglect demand, and we also predicted that he's going to push the far right very high. That's what we wrote in 2017. Okay? Yes, alas, 8 years later, I think that's the data that I will show you in this talk do confirm what we predicted. And it's not because we are very smart or extraordinary or because we are were predicting power like in the antiquity. It was just obvious. Okay, if you take a Keynesian perspective on Macron's program, it was really obvious and very clear that that was going to happen. So, just a few overview of the two mandates we had under Macron. In 2017, he had a majority, so he could make vote everything he wanted in Parliament, but still to destroy the labor law, decades and decades of labor law, he decided to go through a special procedure called ordonnance. An ordonnance allows the president to decide by his own to reform this or this point. So he could have gone through the parliament, but he still decided to go through this very authoritarian tool called ordinances to reform labor. So lots of flexibilization of long-run contracts. He also brought down what employers need to pay for extra hours, you know. We had some progress under Chirac in the 90s about that. In 1995, when Chirac was elected, the right-wing president, he decided to reduce the working time to 37.5 hours per week instead of 39. And in exchange, the employers would be able to annualize. That is, multiply it by the number of weeks, and they have the number of hours people can work without paying extra hours. But under Chirac, we had this very progressive extra hours, 25% for the first one, and then 50% bonus. Macron decided it's going to be 10% minimum, but it will be decided at the firm or the branch level. Okay? So, and then under Chirac, we also had with the election of the left at the end of the 90s, the 37.5 became 35. And yeah, but Macron has decided that immediately after he came to power, allegedly to reduce unemployment. Okay? You know the rhetoric, if the labor market is not flexible enough, people won't hire. Employers won't hire people. And he flexibilized the labor market a lot. He accelerated the supply side policies that we had before, especially under the previous so-called socialist government of Hollande that was already pretty much supply side oriented. A lot of money going to firms. Last year we have had an inquiry from the Senate that has shown that every year the state gives 211,000 billion euros to firms without any counterpart. This is a result of this supply side acceleration. All the money has to go to the firms. Okay? In 2019, we had this yellow vest crisis. I will explain that. It was a revolt, a popular revolt against Macron's policy of people who were deprived of everything. I will explain that later because this is also illustrates the violence of this presidency. Under this presidency, we have had the most violent repression in Europe ever, and I will give you some figures later. Then we had COVID-13, and then Macron comes on TV and says, okay, we'll forget about the supply side policies. Now you have to stay at home and we'll pay for it. And he started to praise the social security, the social system, social protection, etc., etc. Complete U-turn about what we had before. Okay? So quoi qu'il en coûte, whatever it costs, we're gonna pay. from 2020 on. So he did lots of emergency spending, especially because the previous government had completely crushed the spending in the health system, the hospital, and so on. We used to have in France a very good health system, and we realized with COVID that we had become a third world countries in the hospital. Okay, when it all started, we had no masks. The doctors didn't have anything to put on their face. They had to use, you know, what you put in trashes on their faces and all that. We were looking like a third world country. So at that stage, Macron said, quoi qu'il en coûte, we are going to spend whatever it takes, okay, to get out of this crisis. And then when COVID started to end, we had a huge recovery, a historical recovery, plus 1.4 million jobs just over 2 years. But at the same time, then he took this occasion to tighten unemployment insurance. So what you get when you are unemployed and the duration for which you can get it. You know, the average of what you get in the average in the OECD countries is 67%. Now a person who is unemployed in France gets something like 15% of the previous wage. Before Macron, it was 69%. Now it's 50%. And with all these reforms, the 2/3 of the unemployed don't get anything anymore, no money. Before that, when you were unemployed, you would get some money for 2 years. Okay, it was going down, but still you would get some money. Now the 2/3 of the unemployed people don't have the right to anything. Okay, he did a very violent pension reform. 80% of the French people were against it. Even the right-wing people were against that. There were huge demonstrations in which we saw people who usually never go to the street because nobody wanted of this pension reform. Nobody wanted to work up to 62 and then 64. And that created a lots of social trouble. So what he did is to use this article of the Constitution where you don't need a majority. You say, okay, the government decides to do that. It's Article 49.3, and it is going to be implemented. And if you are not happy, it is up to the parliament to censor the prime minister. And of course, the parliament never does usually. Even if for the first time in the French history, it happened under Macron recently. Okay, and in 2024, we had this European election. The far right called RN won those elections. 31.4% voted for the far right. And what Macron said the very day of the result of the election, he has a right to do that. He decided, oh, people have not voted right. So I've decided to dissolve the National Assembly and to call for new elections. And he called for new elections, and he did not respect the result. I will show you. The left has won these elections, and we have right-wing prime minister every time. Okay. And this is very preoccupating because this is exactly what happened in Weimar before Hitler's access to power, not respecting the result of the elections. It's the first time in the French history, and it's opposite to the spirit of the Constitution. Okay, we still had the son of the guy who wrote the French Constitution under de Gaulle of the Fifth Republic, and he was very upset about this decision. You have to respect the election, the majority that comes out of the election. Normally you name a prime minister, and Macron has decided not to, and to go ahead with his right-wing prime ministers. Okay, And the constant thread of all that is supply-side logic, except for the quoi qu'il en coûte under COVID. Okay? The fiscal constraint and the weakening of labor. Okay, so the building block of his supply-side doctrine, so CICE, means massive help to the employers. So 20 billion per year of payroll tax credits, okay, converted into a permanent employer contribution cut. Okay, that's a lot. That's a lot, and there is no conditionality at all for that. So, which firms benefit from that? Total, the big energy firm, La Poste, which is the postal service that doesn't need them, Carrefour, a big group that also exists in Brazil. They got lots of money from this policy. The labor ordinances of 2017 were meant to weaken the labor movement and to crush the wages, allegedly to make France more competitive. And now firm-level agreement can overreach the branch-level agreements. You know, in the past, we had the national agreements, the branch-level agreements, and the firms agreement. But now there is a firm agreement, and the boss is able to crush and to impose his own will. It goes over what is decided upside. This is something also very new, because it's not in the spirit of the French Constitution rules and so on. Yeah, the employment insurance reform, I already talked about it, reducing the time during which you get unemployment benefits, reducing the number of people who are eligible, etc., etc. The logic is to lower the labor costs in order to become more competitive. So behind that, there is sales law. Supply will create its own demand. Okay? Oh yeah, we had this another reform. Since 1981, and the left came to power for the first time in the country, we had a contribution of the very rich called Impôt sur la fortune. It was a contribution of the very rich. It was not much, but still the state would get 4.5 billion a year from this tax on the very, very wealthy. It was a small tax, but still, well, Macron has decided to change this tax on a tax on the wealthy who have houses. And so the amount of the tax that the state gets from this new tax is half of the previous one, and allegedly it was to finance investment. So people who have their wealth on financial markets under the financial form don't pay this tax at all. And plus, when you look at how this tax is created, you need to have a house that is worth more than 1 million euro to pay this a very small tax, something like 2,000 euros. And the rich are still not happy about it. But this change has bring significant benefit to the top 0.1% of households. Okay? So financial assets are completely exempt, and the story was, this will favor investment. Investment is going to go up. Did not happen, of course. It's not because you cut taxes that all of a sudden firms start to buy machines and trucks and all that. Okay? Yes, we also had the flat tax. So whatever, if you own financial assets, the spirit is that you need to pay less taxes than people who work. So we have this flat tax of 30%. So if you only have 10 stocks, or if you are a billionaire, you pay the same tax level, which is 30% on your financial placements. Okay. Yeah, everybody started to call Macron the president of the rich. Yeah, that's and even the mainstream press in France started to call him like this. And now we are in a stage where we have billionaires or millionaires who don't pay any euro of tax at all, zero. Recently, there was a scandal because the previous Minister of Finance had told to the TV that 13,000 billionaires are paying zero tax at all. And then the government said, no, it's not true, it's not true. It happened that it came out and it's true. So if you don't want to pay taxes in France, don't be poor, be a billionaire. Zero. 0 euro, nothing. Okay? So, I'm talking about this study, Institut des Politiques Publiques, because it's a rather mainstream institute. And they found that the richest 1% capture 46% of the net fiscal gain from the 28 tax reform. A policy for 1%. And the bottom 50% gain less than 50 euros a year. Why do they complain? 50 euros is a lot of coffees, right? Okay, you know that, you all know the spirit behind that is trickle-down economics. If the rich are richer, they're going to spend, they're going to invest, and society is going to be better, right? Trickle-down economics. Yeah, about the unemployed. You all know the theories of the new classicals and Lucas. You all know these theories, right? The unemployed people are all voluntary. Lucas even said at some point that it is true that all the unemployed are voluntary because it's very easy for them to take their things, to bring them to the street, to sell them, and they would start a business. Well, Macron said something similar. He started during a visit in a city, an unemployed guy who couldn't find a job told him, oh, okay, I'm struggling, I'm trying to find a job, but I cannot find a job. And he said, you just have to cross the street. Just cross the street and you will find one. And then he repeated that on France 2, a mainstream media, public media. There are some companies that are looking for people, and across the street there are people who are looking for work. You just have to cross the street. Simple as that, right? We need lots of pedestrian passages, and then it will be solved, right? To be honest, I started counting the time from then on where I was crossing the street and nobody would propose a job. Very, very Lucasian statement, right? Rational intertemporal labor, leisure substitution. And Macron has clearly that in mind. Okay? Is Macron the French Thatcher? Maybe. He admires her a lot. He admires her a lot. He has systematically weakened the trade unions, like Macron, with these ordinances. Massive privatization. In France, it was harder because lots of things had already been privatized in the 80s and the 90s, but he was still able to privatize, for example, les aéroports de Paris, which are the Parisian airports. Okay? La Française des Jeux is the gambling system, you know, when you play bingo and this kind of things. It used to be public in order to avoid addictions. He privatized that. there was financial deregulation. So we didn't have any such financial deregulation under Macron, but the financial deregulation was already there. He directly attacked collective bargaining. Macron also worked on flexibilization. Thatcher's government was explicitly based on monetary theory. There is no alternative. You will know this phrase. So Macron did not say that, but he spoke in terms of modernization. Okay, modernization is the equivalent, the French equivalent of there is no alternative. If you want to be modern, you have to be neoliberal, you have to privatize, you have to flexibilize. So the content is exactly the same, but except that people say, oh, modernization is more progressive. No, it's not. Rising inequality, yes. Now the Gini in France is one of the highest in Europe, thanks to Mr. Macron. I think we are second in terms of Gini. That also was the case under Mrs. Thatcher. Of course, the contexts are different. France is within the European Union, so we don't have our monetary policy. We don't have our exchange rate policy, but the rhetoric is different, but at the end, it's the same kind of logic behind that. Now some curves, okay? If you look at the growth rate of GDP, France is in blue, and the euro area is in red. So it's quite similar, right? But honestly, apart from the episode after the COVID, the growth rate went up close to 6%, 5.5. But that was a catch-up effect, right? Because since then, we went back to the flat trend, just below 2%. Last year, it was 0.9. It's not enough. So when you look at this, we didn't do better, we did not do worse than the average of the euro area of the other countries. Now a paradox. Macron, under Macron, employment increased a lot. Lots of jobs were created. But productivity stagnated and it even failed. So it's an apparent paradox, right? But this paradox is easily explained when you see that productivity last year has been, the increase of productivity has been 0.4, so almost close to zero. So why did that happen? Because he created lots of low productivity jobs. And I would even use the wording of David Graeber. He created lots of bullshit jobs. He created lots of bullshit jobs. So jobs in which productivity is really low. Capacity utilization and therefore investment remain weak. Again, one blade cannot substitute two. This is something that the people who have a background in post-Keynesian economics may be interested in, the wage share. These are the official data of the European Commission. You know, people close to Macron say the wage share has not changed in years in France. This is not true. The wage share started falling a lot after the change under the socialist government in '83. But here you can see the evolution under Macron. So we were, where Macron came to power, we were around 60 point something, okay, went down. This is a COVID. It's not surprising that wage share increases in crisis. It's a status fact. And then look after COVID, a fall below the previous level. So the wage share has fallen. It's not surprising, it's a supply side policy, which means that the profit share has increased. Okay? So this is very important. And the economists of Macron say it's not true, but the bad news for him is that the IMF, the World Bank, and Amico, which is the European Commission database, says the same thing, the wage share has fallen. We cannot suspect the European Commission to be hostile to neoliberal policies. That's not true. But their data are really good. And their data are freely online. It's called Amico. You can go there. And you can see the wage share. And you can see this wage share stabilizing at a level lower than the one under which it was. Okay, so roughly speaking, under Macron, the wage share fell by 2%, which is a lot, which means that when 100 euros of wealth are created, 2 euros have shifted from the pocket of workers to the pockets of capitalists. So a fall in the wage share, and this is consistent, this policy is about that, right? Probably if we didn't have COVID and quoi qu'il en coûte, it would have been worse. Yeah, so we are getting close to the end, and what the economists close to Macron say is, look at this. This is unemployment. We created lots of jobs. Unemployment went down. We have solved this issue. They even say in the media that it worked so well that nobody speaks about the unemployment problem again because Macron solved the unemployment. That's what they say. And apparently, yes. Apparently, yes. So this is the ILO unemployment rate in percentage. This is when Macron is elected. And yes, the unemployment rate has went down from 9% to 7 something, which is no miracle. Huh? They said, the economists of Macron, when they replied to the paper I was telling before, they said, okay, we have 9% unemployment, 2% can be solved by demand policies, but 7% can be solved by supply side policies, flexibilization, and so on, and we will take care of this 7%. 7% is still there. Okay. Well, that is the official data that you see in the news and so on, and the people of Macron use. Is unemployment in the meaning of the ILO. The problem is that in France, we have 3 categories of unemployed who are registered to the employment agency. Category A. Category A is for people who have not worked at all during the previous months. 0 hour. Okay? Now, when you are unemployed, if you want to get your unemployment benefits, if you have the right to unemployment benefits, or if you want to get the proposals of the firms, you have to fill a form every month. Otherwise, you have lots of issues. And category A, yes, it has gone down, but category A only includes people who have worked 0 hours the month before. And then there are 2 other categories. B is for people who have worked part-time, less than 78 hours during the past months, but who are still looking for a job. These are people who accepted something temporary. Most of them are immigrants or women who had to take something, but who wants a full-time job. Okay, 78 hours is not enough for living, right? So, and category C is the same thing, but for people who have worked more than 78 hours last month, but who are still active in trying to find a job. So they're registered. So these people don't get any unemployment benefits, right? They work and they are looking for another job because they are in a job that does not fit their competencies, in which is degrading, which is not interesting, which is so. But I would argue that in order to see the full picture, because these people have a job but are looking for something else because they want to be full-time or because they want a job more in line with their skills, I would argue that these people should be counted as unemployed because they do every month prove that they were looking for a job. Why do they do that? Because they want a better job. So when you take these categories together, the picture is very different because category A went down and look at category C went up. Which means that if you take all of them together, at the beginning of Macron's arrival, we had 5.5 million unemployed, and now we have 5.6 million unemployed. So it has increased a little bit. Category A has fallen, compensated by the increase of category C. Okay? That is the whole picture. So he flexibilized a lot, saying that it will be easier to get a job. It's not true. It's easier to get a bullshit job, for sure. So we have, roughly speaking, 1.5 million workers trapped in sub-time contracts, people who would like to work full-time and who are working part-time. And it's really hard to live with the minimum wage if you're working part-time. The share of CDD is not a permanent contract, it's a temporary contract. In new hires has become greater than 85%, which means if you get a job, especially young people, you have 85% of chances of getting a temporary job, not a permanent one. Is very, very high. Okay? In Spain, we had similar figures, and the Spanish government has decided to tackle that and to make sure that the long-term contract becomes a rule again, instead of the exception. Lots of bullshit jobs, lots of psychosocial risks. We have about 260,000 click workers. You know, maybe you saw these kind of things in developing countries, but you have lots of these people just clicking to improve Google Maps and these kind of things. Okay? Of course, women, what an idea is it to be a woman, especially in Macron's France, are overrepresented in this kind of precarious jobs. More than 50% of temporary time workers. So the jobs were created under Macron, for sure, but these jobs are not quality jobs, they are bullshit jobs. Okay? And by the way, the ILO decent work agenda uses 10 dimensions in order to assess employment. Category A is that the Macronists put forward only captures one of these dimensions. Another thing, this is a phenomenon that we had on the Macron SMIC is the minimum wage. And when in a country, the percentage of the whole population that is at the minimum wage rises, it means that you have some issues, right? And look here, this is a proportion of private sector employees at the minimum wage. Look at this. We had 10% in 2014, still 10.5% in 2017 when Macron came to power. Now we have 17.3%. So SMIC is a minimum wage. This is called Smicardization of the French society. I don't know the last figure, but we might end up at 20% of people who earn the minimum wage. It's a lot. It's a lot, right? It's in all cases we have reached a record in the last decades with this figure. So why do we have that? It's because SMIC has an indexation on inflation. So SMIC has increased under Macron, but it's because we have indexation, which means that if you have 2% inflation, the minimum wage has to increase by 2%. That's why the SMIC went up a lot. But what we had under Macron is new, because usually when you increase the minimum wage, the salaries above the minimum wage tend to increase. You know, it's called the halo effect in economics. In France, it was the people who were up to 1.8 times the SMIC that would get more, and that has completely disappeared. So what is that when the minimum wage goes up, people just end up on the minimum wage, people who were above the minimum wage. All the other wages don't raise anymore. It's because of the flexibilization of the labor market. So 30 branches agreement are below the minimum wage floor, so they have to pay the minimum wage. But we have 30 branches of French economy who pay the minimum wage. And again, this is a phenomenon that hurts women a lot. Debt. Macron told us, yeah, debt is going to go down. I'm going to solve that with my policy. We will have lots of activity, lots of investment. Well, debt as a percentage of GDP has stayed stable. COVID came, whatever it takes. And now debt has stabilized to a high level. The yellow vest. This is something I need to talk about because it illustrates the violence of those neoliberal policies. It started in October 2018 after a fuel tax hike that was presented as doing something for the ecology, okay? But lots of people in France who are not in big cities don't have access to public transport. You know what it is in Brazil, right? So people in big cities have access to public transports and the other ones have to take the car. And what we have had with this increase in taxes is that people realized they couldn't pay any more for their fuel. So we had these tax hike. And so we had this revolt that started all over the country. And people were starting to wear the yellow vests you have in their car, okay, as a symbol. And at the beginning, Macron was saying, oh, these are fascists, we don't care about these fascists and so. But it's not true. There were lots of very different people, but from popular areas, something that Macron and his government do not understand. So there are deeper causes to this revolt, you know. There are the stagnation purchasing power, the dismantling of lots of local public services, closing train stations and all these things. The geographic abandonment of non-metropolitan France. These people now massively vote for the far right. Because they don't have schools, they don't have sport, they don't have postal services anymore, they don't have anything anymore. And also the abolition of the tax for the very rich as a symbol that was violent not only for left-wing people. Okay, so lots of the yellow vests were saying they ask us to pay more and more taxes and the very rich don't pay anything anymore. So it's a problem. So it started on 17th of November 2018, largest mobilization in France in decades. It was spontaneous. There were no leaders. It was organized through social media, Facebook, Instagram. They started this thing. I think the main cause of this yellow vest movement is more than 10 years of wage compression or stagnation, and the redistribution of Macron from the workers to capital. Okay? So as a response, Macron decided to organize a debate at the national level so people could debate. And there were debates everywhere, and the debates were put in books, and books were put somewhere, and that was it. We had a huge debate that led to nothing. So, blah, blah. Documented figures about the violence. 111,000 arrests, 3,100 convictions, 2,500 people seriously injured, 24 people lost an eye with the weapon used by the police. The police was targeting their eyes to discourage these people for the first time. 5 people lost a hand, cut off by the police. And the journalist David Dufresne tracked those violences, and there was even a report of Amnesty International, okay, unlawful use of force by French police. Even the Council of Europe was saying you are becoming more violent than Mr. Orban in Hungary, so you should stop that. So the figures are well documented, and this is unprecedented in Western Europe. In no country, including Hungary, there have been such violent repression of protest and demonstration. Nobody. And even under Macron, we had somebody who was in charge of civil rights, a former minister of Jacques Chirac, right-wing, but who fought a lot in order to ask these grenades and these guns used by the police to be forbidden. Even him, even some part of the right wing were shot by the violences imposed to these people under Macron. Okay? Human rights organizations all agree that it should stop, even medical associations, because the hospital could not face all the injured people during the demonstration. This is something we never have had in France, as far as I remember. Never. Okay? So it was Macron's way to avoid engaging with demands related to wages and all that. Okay, now the result of all that is that the far right is really high. So as I told you, more than 30% at the European election. Macron decided to dissolve the assembly. So we had an election and the media was saying the far right is going to win, the far right is going to win. That did not happen because lots of people were mobilized. We still have this firewall against the Nazis in these countries. So what is the program of these people is more and more neoliberal. It was not like this. It was already neoliberal, but less neoliberal 10 years ago, more neoliberal in 2022, and now very neoliberal as we speak. Okay, these people are trying to seduce the economic elites. Nationalist protectionists oppose the ecological transition cost, reduce employer social contribution. So it's the same policy as Macron, but with more racism on the top of it. So the left won the election, and Macron decided not to appoint a prime minister. This is the first time in France since 1945, the end of the Second World War, that somebody wins the election and the president decides not to appoint a prime minister out of this coalition. He appointed right-wing people. He said, nobody has won. So I go ahead like, okay. The pretext was that the left has no majority, but still, so let me show you. This is the current situation in the French parliament. So this is the far right. This is the previous right that is going further and further to the right, but they are very different inside of this block. This is the so-called center of Macron that is very neoliberal, and this is the left that is divided, especially the New Popular Front. In there you have the socialists that voted many times with the people of Macron. You have the Greens that are sometimes voting with the socialists, sometimes voting with the left, and you have a few communists. So that's how our National Assembly looks like. And the far right that had one or two representatives at the beginning of Macron now has 143 elected people, including a former Nazi. Okay, no bloc can govern alone, but still the tradition is to name the people who won the election, but Macron decided not to. Okay, just a few words about the radical left currently in France. We have a party, the biggest left-wing party is called La France Insoumise. Their program, they are meant to be far left, but this is something that has been invented by Macron. They call it radical, populist, irresponsible. But when you look at the program, they want to raise the SMIC to 1,600 net. It's currently 1,400. It's not the beginning of the revolution. They want to re-index wage to inflation. They want selective trade protection in order to make sure that what we import respects the ecological norms that we impose inside of the country. They want a public investment program, progressive wealth taxation to go back to ESF, and public services in reinforcement. They don't even talk about nationalization. Come on, this is a post-Keynesian social-democratic program, right? It's not a radical left revolutionary program that they say in the media. No? They want to implement a demand stimulus. They speak about fiscal multiplier. They want to implement Minsky-type stabilization and so on. So it has nothing, the program has nothing radical. Okay? Well, so it's based on Keynes, and they quote Keynes a lot. So it's not really a revolutionary program. Right? Okay, what we need now? Do I still have some time, or sorry? 10 minutes. Yeah, 10 minutes is enough to conclude. So what are the alternatives that we are trying to develop with les économistes atterrés, the Appalled Economists movement? First thing, we do think that we need to reduce working time further. Currently, the official working time is 35, multiplied by the number of weeks, and firms can adjust. We think we need to reduce it to 32 because of technological change, and most notably AI, working less, working better. Some firms have tried that, by the way. Some firms have experienced that. And the result of the firms that have experienced that are the productivity went up because people work only 4 days instead of 5 during the week. Then they have 1 day free for the children and the administrative stuff and so on. And when they are at work, they are much more efficient. So Work sharing, it allows you to hire more people. You know, in decades in France, it is a reduction of working time under Chirac in the second half of the 1990s that created the highest number of jobs, 400,000 jobs. So we think it's also good for the jobs. There is a gender dimension also. Involuntary part-time falls on women, mainly, mostly. And the reduction in working time, RTT, reduced that gap in our country. Okay? And of course, we need to articulate that with lower working hours, so lower consumption and environmental benefits. So that is one of our proposal, but we also propose that there is no wage reduction up to 2 times the minimum wage. Okay? And we also propose a job guarantee policy. Maybe you have heard about that. I'm one of the French proponents of this idea of job guarantee. So to maintain strict full employment à la Minsky, that is 2.5% of unemployed people. It needs to be decentralized, etc. And the good news in France is that we already have a small experimental framework applied in 250 places that has been implemented by the previous government in 2016. It has been expanded by the government of Mr. Macron from 10 places to 250 places. But now they don't want to go behind these 250 places where you have the job guarantee. Why? Because it changes the power balance between employers and employees. If you have a job guarantee, employees can ask for wage raises, where if you don't have job guarantees, it does not happen like this. We have a small job guarantee experiment. It's not for many people. It's only 2,000 people, but still it exists in some cities. But now we are blocked by the fact that the government doesn't want to expand it. This job guarantee thing is pretty much inspired by the principle of Minsky. Okay, if you are interested in job guarantee, you can discuss that. Well, like in many countries, we need to accompany the ecological transition with increasing wages. Politically, the ecological transition is not feasible if it is the people at the bottom of the distribution that have to pay for the bill. Under Yellow Vest, the starting of the Yellow Vest movement showed that. So the first priority should be, according to us, to raise the minimum wages. And what we proposed in one of the books is that we have re-indexation for the people above the minimum wage in order to avoid the phenomenon I was talking about with 20% of people getting the minimum wage. Okay? So behind that, you have post-Keynesian economics and ecological economics. So we want to restore the tax on the very rich. That is not going to solve economic issues, but we need more fiscal justice. I think many of us have supported the proposal of Zuckman that the very rich needs to pay 2% on their wealth, which they don't want to pay. But I think it's a real need where in a world in which they earn usually more than 8%. Okay. Yeah. So to end up, this is what we have with Macron. The promise was that the GDP growth we will perform better than other European countries. We are below or equal. You know who performs well in Europe? Spain. What has Spain done? Make stable jobs the norm again, increase the minimum wage a lot, implemented demand policies. Macron said we'll create lots of quality jobs. Yes, he created lots of jobs, but bullshit jobs, categories B's and C, have been raising. He said, with my policy, with the startup nation, we'll have lots of competitivity gains. Well, the level of productivity is below the one when he was elected. He said that we'll have trickle-down economics, okay? So let's let the rich be very rich. It will trickle down to everybody. Well, the wage share has gone down by 2%, according to Amico. Macron said, okay, we'll modernize the economy. It will benefit you all. The top 1% capture 46% of the fiscal gains. On the budget side, he said we are going to be responsible. Debt to GDP increased from 98% to 112%. He said with the startup nation, creating lots of startups and so on, everybody's going to be better off. But we have more and more bridges between rich people in cities, living in these cities, and the yellow vests that have nothing. And we have these free blocks. Normally having free blocks, according to the French election law, that favorizes one of the parties is not possible. The two main parties of the past in France were the Socialist Party and the right-wing party. The right-wing party has almost disappeared, and the Socialist Party is shrinking also. So, conclusion, the picture is pretty much a disaster of the supply side policy. Stagnant productivity, Smicardization, social fracture, political crisis. I talked about the alternatives, and I do think that it's not because we are non-mainstream or heterodox that we should neglect the supply side, but it's more than time to think again about demand, social cohesion, other policies. So thank you. So maybe I've been long, but thanks for your attention.